good morning, and good afternoon to in-house counsel and in-house legal professionals from all across North America and the world. Welcome to In-House Connect. My name is Shai Mahani. I am the CEO and co-founder of In-House Connect, and I'm thrilled to have you here with us today. Thank you for spending your breakfast time or your lunch time with us, and special thanks to our wonderful sponsor, which is the In-House Connect Hub. The In-House Connect Hub is where In-House Connect subscribers can gather between our webinars to trade ideas, ask questions, access free content from In-House Connect, articles, blogs, all of that great stuff. Free to sign up. It's a great community platform. So thank you to the Hub for sponsoring, and please sign up if you're not on it already. We have almost 1,000 people signed up to the Hub. It's really cool. I think you're going to really enjoy it. So I'll put a link to that in a bit. I also want to say thank you to our fantastic presenters today, Denis Potemkin and Manu Kanwar. And Manu, I have especially a big soft spot for. He's my former boss. And in fact, he gave me my first opportunity in-house. So I owe Manu a lot more than I can say, frankly. So it's wonderful to have them both on. And they are going to teach us legal design principles to optimize MSAs and common sales agreements. I'm really intrigued by this topic, and a lot of us do contracts and MSAs and sales contracts, so this is going to be a really interesting look at it. Legal design principles. So this is our 24th event of the year, and I'm wondering, are you here for the first time or have you tuned in before? Looks like we have about a 90-10 split, so 10% new. Welcome to the 10%, and welcome back to the 90% repeat customers, so to speak. All right. Today's event is Legal Design Workshop for In-House Counsel, using legal design principles to optimize MSAs and common sales agreements. Our panel features Manu Kanwar. Manu is a former tech and media GC, my former boss. He is a systems relationship coach and an expert on organizational wellness. Manu has a holistic yet practical take on improving legal service delivery and unlocking value. Our fellow co-panelist, even though he was never my boss, he's a wonderful, legal professional, Denis Potemkin. Denis is a legal innovator, technologist, and thought leader on better contracts, and creator of the Majoto design system and platform. He is a tech and IP lawyer with an in-house background. Again, really wonderful to have you both on with us today. I'll turn things over to Manu to get us started.
Brilliant. Thanks, Shai. Well, look, thanks very much for the invitation and the very warm welcome. I really appreciate that. You may have been a brand new baby into in-house when we first met, and I hired you into the team, but you are a great addition to the team right from the very beginning. So I just wanted to play that back to you, but also to say that what I've seen you do since then and growing this community has been nothing short of fantastic. And I'm really, really proud of what you've achieved. Well done. So thanks to everybody here who's here. I know maybe it's customary to have the cameras off, but to the extent that anybody's comfortable to put them on so we can feel that we're in a room together, then that would really certainly help us and maybe help each other to get into a bit of a workshop type atmosphere. So yeah, thanks very much for the welcome. We'll tell you a little bit more about what we do and how we do it as we go along. But first, as part of that interactivity, we wanted to get a sense check as to how experienced you are and or what your thoughts are in relation to legal design. As Shai has mentioned there, we're going to be talking about legal design today, largely in the context of a sales contract, but as a practice, as a discipline, it has tremendous value right across legal. And we'll touch on that, especially at the end, but maybe also as we go through. So just to help us with that, Shai is going to share a poll. And what we would love to know are what your biggest pain points in relation to contracts, and do you currently use legal design? So I'll just give you a minute to answer those polls.
And Manu, I'm seeing the results of question one. What are your biggest pain points with contracts? It's interesting. It's the first time we've done this short answer function in our webinars. So I see it on my end in like the Zoom portal, and I can read them out if you'd like me to. Would you like me to do that?
Yeah, I think it'd be helpful as they're coming in. Yeah.
Sure. So looks like, first of all, 79% have never used legal design, 18% use a little bit, and 2% use it all the time, which is wonderful. So here are some of the pain points I'm seeing people say. Custom drafting is a pain point, trying to compare with standard language in our own contracts, indemnity clauses, gummy boilerplate that is redundant, language, ambiguous terms, indemnity and warranty, Adobe edits, I guess editing in Adobe, repetitive manual reviews, not enough people on the team, too many contracts to review, reviewing the contract, boilerplate contract terms seems to be an issue, storage and version control, liability caps, indemnification provisions, internal collaborations, getting the right people to weigh in and answer questions, take ownership, limitation of liability, indemnification, privacy, keeping track of different language and different contracts, ensure equal terms, redline negotiations with other companies that don't rely on in-house or outside counsel, time required to draft, even when using good precedents, repetitions in developing a playbook, time constraints. Clients always give you the draft at the last minute for you to revise and negotiate, and they want it back, ASAP. Again, indemnity, limitation on liability, and unreasonable contracts, and other side making non-substantive changes just to change the language. That's a few of the responses we've received, and I will send this list over to Samantha to make that word cloud.
Yeah, brilliant. Okay, yeah. So we'll put that in, and we can share that with the team. And thanks very much for that. There's a broad range, obviously lots of commonalities in relation to limitations of liability and warranties and some things that go to the substance. But there was really a cross section of pain points there that go to both the aesthetics of the contract, the contents of the contract, the intent, the process, the commercial objectives. All of those were captured in that word cloud, which in that poll, which we will share in the word cloud. And all of those pain points can be addressed by legal design. They're all things that we will touch on as we're going through. So as I do that, Samantha, Shai has given us a great introduction. As he mentioned there, Denis and I are CEOs respectively of LexSolutions and Majoto. We're both ex-GCs, senior in-house lawyers, and now are running these organizations really to improve the way that legal is practiced, but also the value that it delivers. We work very closely together within both of these organizations. But let's move on. Denis, let me hand over to you.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, and thank you for the warm intros. Shai, very quick one. Can we share the results of the second question? Is that something that I can do by dragging the whole quiz into my screen?
So yes, you can. Yes, you should be able to do that.
Is that visible now?
No, yeah. It's not coming up. I don't see it. Do you? Here, I'm gonna share results. It's yeah. You should be able to see it here.
Can everyone see that? Yeah, looks like they can.
Yeah. Well, I'll let you share the results in the meantime. I think it's interesting. I mean, obviously, the majority have never used legal design. 18% used it a little bit. So what we're going to do here today is we're not going to tell you what legal design is. We're going to show you, or at least an initial kind of experience of it. And we're going to do that through a series of exercises. We're going to look at sales contracts, and we're going to see how legal design can be applied to sales contract in a way that tackles some of these or many of the issues that you've raised. So the first exercise we're going to do is called the purpose pyramid. Why do we do this exercise? Well, before you can go somewhere, improve a process or improve a contract or speed up deals, right? So you have a destination, you need to understand where you're going, right? But before you can understand where you're going, you need to know why you're going. So, if you're going on a hike, before you can understand, well, do I choose a mountain or a village or a walk in the city? You kind of need to understand why you're doing it. Is it for exercise? Is it to spend some time with friends, right? So the why drives everything else. So we are very strong believers in understanding the why. What the purpose pyramid does is help you understand objectives and the big picture why. So we're going to open this up to you. So the question to you is, well, what is the purpose of a sales contract? And please feel free to unmute yourselves and shout, and we'll write these things down. Feel free to put this in the chat, and we'll try and capture this as best we can. So, by the way, thank you very much for those who that we can see who've put on their videos. That's fantastic. Lovely to see you. So over to you. We'll try and capture this as best we can.
So Denis, we don't have everybody can unmute. So a couple of things. If you want, you can chime in the chat. You can also raise your hand in the reactions, function in Zoom, and I will, if you raise your hand, I'll let you unmute, and then you can chime in. You could also, use your thumbs up, and I will see that and unmute you. But otherwise, we typically don't let people unmute. So a couple of things. Looks like expectation setting to memorialize the deal and protect the client from potential pitfalls and loopholes, revenue generation. And then as far as, and Caitlin asked if you can get the slides, I'm not sure how it works because you're using a separate, it's called the Miro board. I don't know if you're going to make that available, but this will be available for free, this recording, just to make that clear. So you can watch it.
And Caitlin, if you want to reach out to us, then we can share something at least, and we'll work out what we can. Sure.
And again, if anybody wants to come off of mute, give me a thumbs up, give me a raise hand, and I'll let that, I'll see it and I'll unmute you.
Okay, so maybe have we got any other sort of ideas coming? Okay, so we've got revenue, expectations setting. Anything else?
What to do when things go wrong? Yep, dispute process to achieve revenue goals with reasonable risk parameters based on efficient document. So it's revenue growth, it's revenue generation while limiting downside risk. I like the what to do when things go wrong. I think that is obviously a big component of contracts for sure. Build a closer relationship beyond transactional. That's an interesting one.
I love that one. That's great. Yeah.
Enhance a trading relationship. So very similar.
Yeah, exactly. Commercial objectives.
So enhance relationship, build relationship, right?
Right. I agree on basic essential terms. Cool. Okay.
Maybe I can ask the question, what expectation setting? Why do we want to set expectations? What does that help us do?
It seems like, so just looking at the last comment, structure on how to terminate the relationship, prevent misunderstandings, provide clarity, eliminate surprises, misunderstandings, predictability.
Predictability, yeah.
So something to manage and plan around. Helping ensuring that your team and the partner are on the same page. So clarity within the relationship, within the objectives. Yeah, similar to that, clear understanding on what's being provided, what are the deliverables, measuring success around the objectives.
Oh, okay. I like that.
What you like that. And clarifying expectations helps build partnerships and avoid miscommunication and resentments and conflict. So building partnerships by clarifying expectations and avoiding any miscommunication and resentment and conflict. Which goes to, I guess echoing, the notion of building relationships beyond the transactional.
Yeah, fantastic. There's one aspect. So we know that the purpose of the contract is to build relationships. What about, there's an aspect that I think is missing here. It's around revenue generation, but what do a lot of your business want you to do? They want you to help achieve revenue, but also there's a speed, there's a timing element there, right? They want you to do it fast. The contracts need to be able to build relationships fast. So perhaps part of the purpose is to speed up rather than slow down the revenue generation and the relationship building, correct?
Yeah, if you're nodding head to that.
Yeah, so perhaps, kind of fast, let's call it faster deals.
Faster deals. Yeah. What do we need to build those relationships? I think you alluded to it there, Denis, but I want to sort of ask the group. In the meantime, while you think about that, we've got SLAs that are quick and reasonable.
Yeah, I've got that.
Oh, you got that.
Sorry, go on, Manu.
I was going to say, sales team wants speed, succinct language, limited negotiation. So yeah, that's it. I mean, all of those help with faster deals, obviously. So succinct language, limited negotiation, and back to the SLAs being reasonable. That reasonable language, I guess, it helps. Removing friction, need trust to build a relationship. Yeah, thanks, Christina. That's exactly.
That was the big missing T word.
Yeah, that's exactly what we're looking for. So we want to build trust quickly as well as do the deals quickly.
Right. Yeah.
Training and knowledge transfer, efficient contracting, protecting IP.
Fantastic. I think this is good. So this is really good. I mean, we could, I'm sure, carry on, and there's lots of other sort of ideas. But what I love about this is that we very, very quickly, this is a pretty smart group. We very quickly, perhaps quicker than normal even, got to what's really important, and that's the top of this pyramid. So part of this exercise is really to start to understand the hierarchy. So you know, perhaps some of you or all of you know the Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Well, this is a kind of a contractual or organizational representation of hierarchy of needs. You know, with any contract, you have some specific objectives you want to achieve, right? There are some top level objectives you want to achieve, but there's also a why, there's a purpose, and that's something different. And that purpose, is things like getting the business to achieve its revenue goals. It's building partnerships. It's all the business stuff rather than the legal objectives. And that's really, really important to understand, to capture expressly, because what we found is that those things have a direct impact on how you look at contracts later on. So, and that's what we're going to do. So that's brilliant. Thanks so much. We're going to move on to the next piece. So maybe I just say just one more word, so understanding purpose objectives is really, really key in any legal design project. I would argue in any project or any activity other than the business as usual and mundane, because that's your purpose, that's your why, that's the very starting point that then drives everything else. And we're big believers in doing that right at the beginning. The next thing that we want to look at, right, is if we want to make contracting work, right, we need to understand, well, who are the players, right? Who are the users of the document and the contractual process? And this is absolutely key to design thinking and legal design, because the whole point of design thinking is that you build services and products around the user, and it's around really truly understanding the user. And traditionally, the legal environment, legal business has been much more about building it around the lawyer and their needs, right? And legal design is all about taking design thinking and applying it to the law, and that really means thinking about the broader user needs, not just the lawyers. So we're going to do a quick exercise here to understand the users. We call this the value horizon, and we'll explain why we call that in a second. But what I'd like to maybe a quick check with Shai is the whole of the chart visible to your screens?
So there's like a timer that's counting down. Maybe you can X that out. Yeah.
All right, we're nearly done with that timer. So, okay, cool. So over to all of you again. So who are the users? If we think about a sales contract and a sales process, who are the users?
And again, folks, if you want to come off of mute, if you're brave enough to come off of mute, press, give me a thumbs up or raise your hand. Happy to do it. Otherwise, chime in the chat. Let us know.
Yeah. So the first one we've got is legal. So yeah, that's right, Sheila. So they are a user. They are also a service provider. End users, clients, and sales.
Yeah. So who are the clients here? So this is perhaps the sales team, right?
Yeah, business owners, finance or accounting, the end customer, provisioning teams, billing teams, support teams. So all the teams that legal are supporting for their various contracts.
Okay, fantastic. Have I captured everything that's been written down so far?
And provisioning, business. Yeah, end customer. So I guess that's the end customer of the business, which makes sense.
Right, exactly. Yeah. So it's not just your sales team, it's the other side, right?
Yeah.
And perhaps it's worth, of course, I mean, we've mentioned legal, this is assuming legal in your organization, but there's also the lawyers on the end customer side as well, potentially, right?
Yeah. We've got business owner. So, that'd be the shareholders in this context. Your own shareholders. They receive value. Alongside the sales team, you've got the relationship manager. So the accounts, I guess, the sales account leads as they were relationship leads.
Okay.
Operations team, scientists. I guess that's if we're selling health services or you're a health SaaS. Product service business unit. We've got finance, infosec, support teams that are relevant for the SLA.
Okay. Yep.
Whoever is the user, important to consider them not just now, but in future versions of the user. Yeah, that's a good point.
So yeah, this is really good. So I'm hold on. So future versions
of the user.
That's really interesting. Okay. That's really interesting. Okay. I'm not entirely sure where I'll put it, so I'm going to put it just as an aside, because in a way it's a future version of each of these users.
Well, yeah.
That's a really interesting one. That's the first time we've had something like that. That's really, really brilliant. I like that. Okay. I did notice, so we had shareholders. Did I see something like management and regulators? Regulators. Okay. That's fantastic. So shareholders, regulators, C-suite, I think that's kind of business owner. Let's call it C-suite here. So depending on the size of the organization, of course. Yeah. Who else? Are we missing anything here?
Got from Karen, reliance on third parties. So I guess maybe that's third parties that are helping us fulfill the sales.
Right. So other sort of, yeah. So you got an ecosystem, right? Other parties in the let's call it in the sort of transaction ecosystem. I'm not sure if that's the best way of describing it, but hopefully we all understand that. Okay. Yeah, I like that. Yeah, because obviously, you've got a sales contract, but if you've got subcontractors, you've got other partners that need to read it, understand it, because then it makes clear what they need to do. And also the legal and operations need to be able to understand this and trickle this down to other parties that are involved. So I think that's a very good point.
Yeah. And
channel, absolutely, yeah. Investors, yeah. I mean that's fantastic. So look, this is brilliant input. And as you can see, what we're trying to do here is, as well as understanding the users, we're kind of understanding also how close or far they are to the center. And part of this is to make sure that we do think about the broader users, because those users in the outer circles, how often do you consciously think about them when you're producing a contract? I expect most of us do not consciously think about this unless there's a specific legal issue that's in the contract that's impacted them. But of course, this is all relevant. And the reason why we put it in this framework is to really demonstrate that the wider that your document, contract, or indeed legal process can positively impact that wider range of people, the more value that document, process, or legal thing is producing. And again, with legal design, all of these are users, and we mustn't forget the lawyers, right? But they're also the users, but we've got to think about all those. And what we also need to understand in a more deeper project workshop, we would try to understand, well, what are the needs of each of some of these users, right? And it depends on the context. In an M&A transaction, which is very, very lawyer-led by its nature, the needs of the lawyers on both sides are pretty significant, right? Whereas perhaps in a more kind of sales, fast-paced SaaS, B2B sales kind of environment, the needs of the lawyers are by definition less important than business, especially if the business has to primarily self-serve on the majority of the transactions. So the needs of those users will change also depending on the kind of contract that you're looking at. So that's understanding users, and there are, of course, lots of other things that you can and may need to do in terms of understanding users. So understanding their needs, maybe doing some user profiling, some empathy maps, various other forms of user research. You can ask some of these users directly, well, what do you want, or what problems are you facing in the as-is situation? And that allows you to kind of get a better understanding. So this goes much deeper than that, but we find this is a really, really useful way of getting into that frame of mind and identifying who you're designing or who you're creating this document for. Yeah. We're going to move swiftly on because time is running. So what we're going to do now is we're going to look at a typical SaaS agreement, which is a type of sales agreement. So obviously, I'm not expecting you to read this document, but hopefully the overall look of this is recognizable to you. This is actually a template pulled from practical law. I would guess that's a pretty typical contract for a significant, in terms of what lands on your desks day to day. So what we're actually going to do now is we're going to zoom in to a few pages of that typical looking contract. And going back to the exercise that we've just done, thinking about the purpose of the contracts and the needs of the users and their needs, let's do a bit of an assessment as to in what ways does this contract meet the purposes and objectives and the user needs, and in what way perhaps does it not. So again, as you guys are doing all the hard work here, so over to you again. Please contribute in the way that you've been doing up until now, and we're going to capture this as we go along. So obviously positives and negatives.
So Dennis, can you zoom in a little bit more? I don't know if people are able to see it. I'm not able to see
So
it.
the specific, so don't worry about the specific text. We can assume this is a practical law precedent. So let's assume that it does the legal bits. It does the job on the legal side. So what we're really looking at here is there's two aspects. We're going to start with kind of tone of voice and overall kind of first time in software, they call it first time user experience. So what is the impression that this document creates when you first open it, first look at it? So that's really the objectives. Don't worry about the words at all. Any thoughts? Looks like an academic paper. So we sort of, hold on, I'm just going to move these a little bit closer. So academic paper, I guess it's dry and technical, right? So we'll say dry and technical. Okay. Looks long. Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, that index suggests that this is a long and maybe complex. So it's kind of signals that it's long and complex. And that's the first thing that the user sees is like, oh God, I've got to go through this agreement.
Yeah, and to echo that tone of voice you just used there, it's cumbersome. Big law form rather. Table of contents are not really helpful. Need to consider how.
Maybe I could, for the person who comment, why is a table of contents not particularly helpful in your view, or in anyone's view?
Just while we think about that, Jerry's come up with a good comment there that the reaction to receiving something like this will be, this will take a long time to negotiate. And yeah, that's very true. As you receive one of these, the first thing that you'll think is, oh, wow, a lot of work to do. This deal is going to be complicated and hard work and long. Yeah, Laurie's responded to say, actually, in relation to a long and complex contract, she finds the table of contents is super helpful. So I guess Diane also
it can be helpful to orientate, but yeah, so it's going to be also, a lot of these things are subjective, of course. Yeah, so it doesn't have any context or purpose. I mean, we have it has a sort of recitals, but we know that the recitals are pretty anodyne most of the time. So yeah, I think that's a good comment, I think, from Michael, that yeah, no obvious statement of context or purpose. Yeah, I like that. I like that. Yeah, formal. So it does come across as formal, which might be right for certain contexts, right? But perhaps might not be right for other contexts. So excessive formality does that, maybe some of your customers, and depending on your organizations and brand, you don't want to have that kind of tone of voice. You want to make it more on brand. On this point about table of contents, obviously the nice thing is that it's a pretty recognizable way of laying out the content. On the other hand, it has no hierarchy, right? Everything is equally, apart from what goes at the end or what goes at the beginning, but even that doesn't necessarily signal hierarchy, right? So yeah, I would suggest that a table of contents on its own does not indicate, well, what inside here is actually important. Any other? So this is there's a comment from Sheila, TOCs in, I think, Google Docs. So this is a kind of a comment on us on Google Docs specifically. Yeah. So there's all, yeah, I mean, I guess there's an overall comment. You could say, well, what is the tool here? Is it Word? Is it Google Docs? What are the limitations? Does it help to work with the contract in the most efficient and best possible way? So, yeah, there's a point about familiarity. And that's something, that is something to consider. So familiarity of structure can be helpful in certain contexts. I think that's a good point. Any other thoughts? If we think about the kind of the relationship building part, so there's two bits when we looked at the purpose pyramid, the relationship building, revenue, supporting or enabling revenue, and faster deals and faster trust, all those kind of things. To what extent does this document kind of achieve that or not?
We had some comments earlier that it may not be relevant for the for the type of product or service that's being delivered. It may work for something that requires formality, but for a company that's maybe smaller, more agile product, we might need something more simpler, which goes to your point about making it on brand. It doesn't really reflect the type of relationship or the type of product that we might be selling.
Yeah. Do you think that the opening up this, to what extent do you think, if this document lands on your desk, does it create, from the other side, let's say, does it create trust?
Just chiming in with my own 2 cents, definitely doesn't build trust. It seems very formal and, very lawyerly, very CYA, right? Very very formal and to the point. Maybe not to the point, but very formal. So I don't think it builds trust. Probably goes the other way.
Yeah. Fantastic. We're going to, so keep thinking about those things. We're going to look at a couple of other pages here. So, I mean, we've seen the index, but, thinking about what that contract looks like inside. So, you've got, it's very text-based. You've got all these kind of square brackets within square brackets, pretty sort of standard hierarchy throughout. So it looks, each content looks the same. Each bit of content kind of looks the same. Any other thoughts on what that experience is like, especially from a kind of structure and language point of view, perhaps?
Yeah, and we've got from Ed here that the business people wouldn't like it, which is true. Comment from Megan that it's going to be difficult for this to build trust. Same for Carlos. Feels defensive from Kristen.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah, so it's kind of technical, not really made for a lay person. Not made for non-lawyers. Controversial word, non-lawyers, but we'll use it in this context anyway.
I think it's
organized and thorough. Okay.
I think too, people who negotiate these provisions all the time or regularly probably feels familiar, but going back to that value chart, right? I'm sure people on the outer rim or maybe even in the middle probably wouldn't understand these provisions at all. So it's interesting to kind of think about them.
What about, I mean, thinking about, many of you are probably encouraging or trying to get the business to do routine contracts themselves without bothering you with every damn contract. Any thoughts around whether, and that obviously goes to speed and empowerment and trust and relationship building and all that kind of stuff. Any thoughts on whether this contract helps or hinders that attempt to get the business to work with it? I just wanted to pick out that someone had said that to them, this does create trust because detailed provisions can create trust. So yeah, that's, I think, absolutely.
And then the context there is I guess the type of product and the type of company that you're selling to, for instance, if it's a bank or something.
Yeah. Okay. There was some comment on language.
Yeah. Age-old legalese, repetitive terminology that could and should be streamlined. Somebody else had a comment previously about making things very simple and easy to understand. We've also had a comment about the formatting in terms of having business-related clauses first. The ordering here is poor. That's from Michael.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, yeah, so business-related, not business first. Yeah. I mean, ironically, a lot of the time, the business stuff is relegated to schedules, right?
Yeah, or dotted around, yeah.
Yeah. Cool, fantastic. I think this is great. So lots and lots of and this is right, that we need to be looking at the positives and the negatives. This is all about balancing that out and seeing where can you improve while still maintaining the things that work in this document. So the question is there a better way? Right. So first of all, before we look at that, let's just try and sort of capture, and I know different people have different views, so this is imperfect, but one thing that you could do is say, okay, we're looking at some of these issues that we looked at in this document, where are we? So is it made with users in mind, right? So is it mostly made for lawyers or mostly made for users? And, we think it's no matter what its, how do you say, virtues of this contract, it's still, you'd think it's primarily made for lawyers. So I would sort of say it's somewhere between 2 and 3 in terms of made for lawyers. If anyone violently disagrees, please say in the chat or raise your hand. Is it clear and simple? So again, on the spectrum between complex and difficult and simple and clear. Again, that might be, that's going to depend a little bit on context and preference. So I think it's a little bit better than the first one, but it's still probably quite complex and difficult. And certainly when you look at the number of pages and the wall of text, I think it's on the sort of the lower half of that. And then finally, does it represent, if this was your business using that contract, does it represent your values? So is it completely faceless, impersonal, and on brand, or is it on brand and reflects the culture in the way that you like to talk to your customers? And I would put this as a lowest possible score, because there's nothing that represents any values. It's very dry. And any kind of thoughts or violent disagreements on that? I think there's a comment from Megan about context. Yeah, absolutely. And that's why with legal design, we go through these kind of structured exercises to understand purpose, context, users, and lots of other things, because context really does matter. That's absolutely correct. And that's part of the job of us as legal designers, is to understand that context and to formulate, okay, well, what therefore does the contract need to achieve, and how is it designed to be able to achieve that? Brilliant. So question is there a better way? So I'm just going to show you a side-by-side comparison between this contract that we've been looking at and a designed SaaS contract that we recently worked on. So the one that we worked on is it's a B2B stroke B2C kind of combo. But in essence, as you can see, first of all, it starts off in a completely different way. It has a more human introduction. Again, you don't worry about too much about the words, but essentially we have a kind of very human, kind of purpose-led introduction that tries to set some context. It provides some information around accessibility, reading time, and how readable it is to sort of say, look, signal to the user, look, we've thought about you. Instead of table of contents, in this particular case, it has an agreement map, which signifies complexity. So that this is a simple document, even though it's not actually that simple, but it has a simplified information architecture. So it's 5 elements, and each of these, so you can get an at a glance understanding of what's inside the document. This is obviously very highly branded because of a particular service this is. So it's kind of taking design cues from the brand and the website, and so it's designed to be quite sort of friendly. In the way that the agreement starts is that we sort of look at, we sort of give some orientation, kind of who's who, how does all this work, instead of jumping straight into, let's say, kind of complex definitions and that kind of thing. And then, in terms of when you go into the substance, to the main body of the contract, rather than a wall of text, we use all kinds of what we call design patterns, which are ways of representing information in clearer way. So for example, we use things like user journeys. So here's how this thing works and what happens at each stage. We'll use things like swim lanes. So do's and don'ts, or, obligations, exceptions, us, you, in order to both convey a lot of different things. It conveys things like balance. Like if you can imagine that you've got a customer saying, these are your obligations, here's ours. And if you can show that there's some balance in those obligations, then that creates a great sort of feeling that this is a balanced contract. It allows the information to be presented in a much more compressed way than with traditional drafting. And it just makes it very easy to read and understand. So those are just a few kind of snapshots just to give you a sense of how you could do it very differently with design. I'm conscious of time, so maybe if we think about those scores again, and again, I'll sort of do this quickly and shout if anyone disagrees. If you think again about scoring the traditional contract versus the design contract, is it made with users in mind? Well, you might argue about how well it achieves this, but this contract is definitely very much made with end users in mind, and that includes the customer, the customers and all the different users around this service. And this is kind of done through the layout, the way that we signal information, how long have you got, where are you in the contract? It kind of all gives users kind of different aids to help to read and orientate around the document. If you think about, is it clear? Well, we think that this creates significant more clarity because of how it lays out the information. It doesn't remove the detail. It just lays it out in a clearer way, in a clearer and more readable way, using plain language. And then finally, is it on brand? Well, in this case, we think it's very on brand, and we've used visual branding elements throughout the whole agreement that come from the product and the website and the app. So there's a consistent experience when users are being onboarded, for example. I'm just wondering if you have any sort of comments around, do you disagree with any of these kind of assessments that I've made? Any other kind of thoughts?
I think generally it's a very cool way of drafting a contract. I think it's very eye-opening and pretty fresh and revolutionary. Frankly, I've never seen a contract like that. At the same time, I think there was a question right on the same point from Alexis. Has such a contract been interpreted by a court arbiter? Like, what happens if gotta litigate this type of contract, or have to litigate the contract? There's no headings or sections, no paragraph numbers. How do we, what happens if we have to litigate? It's hard, it's easy. It seems like it's easy to make this, if this is for an end user, it works beautifully. But to another lawyer, I feel like, how are you going to put the indemnification in a section in a swim lane? Like, that would be kind of funny to see, like, don't do this, don't do this, like, what are your response to, the more formal aspects of contracts?
Yeah, so there are two sort of observations briefly. One is, with all of these things, you've got to balance risk versus the sort of the commercial objectives, right? Mm-hmm. So if the objective was to reduce risk, well, that's essentially why we end up with these kind of long dysfunctional contracts that really slow down the business, because there's an excessive balance on risk. And the question is, how often do these things get litigated, right? So in different jurisdictions and different contexts, these things play out very differently, right? But if you think about how often do you end up litigating your sales contracts, right? You'd probably more likely kind of resolve things amicably with your customers than end up in court. Now, so there's that balance. It's all about that balance, about how much do I focus on risk versus how much do I focus on the trust, the speed of deals, etc. And legal design is very much about that balance. The other observations I'd make around sort of clarity and that kind of thing. So we know that conventional legal text is actually very dysfunctional. If any of you don't believe me, then read Ken Adams. He's got a blog, he's got a book. He's not the only one, but he's been very vocal for decades about just how dysfunctional conventional contract drafting is. So I won't go into the detail of how and why, but do take if anyone's skeptical on what I say, take a look at Ken Adams. He wrote a book called A Manual of Style for Contract Drafting, and he is a very sharp critic of conventional text. And essentially, part of what legal design is all about, it's not about dumbing it down or reducing the content or reducing the risk coverage. It's actually about getting rid of that dysfunction. And so a well-designed contract is going to work better than a conventional contract across the board, on both risk and sales. And I can see Tessa Manuela, who I know well, who's in the audience. She's nodding her head because she knows this stuff really well. But this is the key. So the key, and this is why legal design is not just, you've got to think about it, and there's some process to do, because you've got to make sure that while you're simplifying and clarifying, you're not actually substantially reducing the substance of the contract. But generally, what I found and lots of other designers and people who do contract work have found, you can take an average contract and shorten it by probably 25 to 50% without taking any of the substance out. just because of the amount of dysfunctional language that gets built up through practice and through this kind of and the way that precedents work. You're taking these precedents and copying and adding and adding and adding. There's very little kind of simplification. So that would be my response to that.
We had a comment about negotiating these, whether it's harder or easier in terms of redlining and so on.
Yeah, so again, that's going to depend entirely on the context. So we've had situations where we've designed documents specifically in Word because they're highly negotiated. So you do need that numbering. You need that sort of ability for people to easily, to lawyers on the other side to kind of redline, in which case you take different design decisions and the end contract looks very different, the kind of thing that I've showed you. But we've also had successes with sales contracts, especially where we've just eliminated negotiations altogether. So we've had customers who've basically speeded up deals by 50 to 80% and reduced negotiations to virtually zero or actually zero, and also substantially reduced queries versus their previous contracts. So we've seen some fantastic success on that. And again, depending on the dynamics and the context, you make design decisions to make that work. So I see, Shai, you put the next poll up. So yeah, it would be amazing. I think our time is up. So it'd be amazing to kind of get a mood check, see how you feel about this, and have we managed to change any opinions or move the needle through this admittedly very short look at legal design.
I think you definitely opened some eyes. It was very interesting to see the comparison. I think lawyers, right, being the risk-averse people that we are, there's still some skepticism about what happens when things go wrong. How are you going to present? How would you, so take that, sales contract as an example. How do you handle indemnification, limitation of liability? Is it in a different section? Is it more like and is it presented in a more traditional format, or is it, did you legal design, did you apply legal design principles to that section as well?
Yeah, so absolutely. So I don't know if I've got a section like that, but we might have, this is a section from another contract, for example, where we've got the liabilities and liability caps and provisions in here. You might put indemnities into as part of the responsibility swim lane. But yeah, absolutely. Again, if the language is critical, then you approach it in the appropriate way. Sometimes what we do is we provide, a fairly robust legal language, but what we'll do is, you could provide a side-by-side explainer in plain language about what this is. You might sort of signal it in some way. You might break up the clause into, well, here's the core bit and here's the legal detail, and you visually signal that level of hierarchy. So the lawyer who needs to look at the detail looks at the detail. The business guy who understands, okay, there's an empty here. I don't need to look at all the detail, but I've got the main point here in the big paragraph. So that's the way we would handle that.
All right, very cool. Thank you. If you want to tell us more about you and Manu and what you do, and then we'll, if there's any more questions, we'll tackle them, and then we'll wrap up for the day.
Cool. Manu, do you want to say then a few things about that kind of bigger picture?
Yeah, I think I alluded to this at the beginning. We're going to focus today largely on contracts and how legal design applies to improving contracts, the process, the objectives, and also the risk mitigation in relation to contracts. But there is a much wider world for which legal design, where we can drive benefit throughout legal practice more generally. And we've given, some examples here. Ultimately, both at Majoto and at LexSolutions, our overall mantra has been to help make legal better. And that means the life within law better. And this pyramid really describes that. So what are we doing in relation to value creation, growing and transforming legal teams and delivering value for the business? Again, applying these principles to relationships, to delivering on business strategy, to helping drive and develop the legal team in a meaningful way helps with that. Related to that very much is culture, the culture of the legal profession more generally. Denis and I ran a session a couple of years ago in the middle of the pandemic at a very sad time when George Floyd was murdered, and there was a lot of Black Lives Matter movement all over LinkedIn. So we took some law firms to see if they actually meant what they were putting out there in terms of their plaudits. And so we looked at diversity. We did a very similar workshop to this, but looked at diversity more generally in the legal profession. And since then, we've done that a few times in different contexts, looking at well-being, looking at mental health, and so on. So how can you improve the culture using these principles, where you look at where the users are, what their expectations are, what's going on at the moment, what problems are we facing, and how can we innovate to deliver something better? And that brings me on to innovation. So we've talked about contracts, but looking at legal ops more generally, how can we improve the overall process, where not just in relation to contracting, but also in relation to gathering data, disseminating data, in terms of creating self-serve tools for the business so they can do a lot of this stuff themselves, and they've got a lot more information at their own fingertips, driving automation and so on. So that just gives you an example of the bigger picture within which legal design can play a really, really big part. This is an example of how we do it. So we've talked a little bit about users, but it's really important to align all your stakeholders. So understand who's coming to the party, what do they need to get out of it, and aligning them right from the very, very beginning. Doing a discovery process, as we did a little bit at the beginning, where you understand who your users are, what the purpose is, what problems are you facing at the moment. Let's get all of that, really understand it, so we can assess more deeply what's going on, where the problems are, and also what success might look like, so we can then gauge where we want to end up and going to. That all helps us then to really, once we've prioritized both the problems, identified solutions, prioritize those, we can now start to define a really well-built and articulated roadmap. And that will help you design lots of different sprints or different work groups that you want to attach, whether that's going to be in relation to contracting, data, self-serve tools, and so on, and then obviously deploy. And with any legal design process, it's very, very iterative. It's very, very agile. So it's never going to be linear that we're going through this and then just deploying. We'll be moving back and forth according to user needs, according to new information that comes up, according to how circumstances might change, so that we know that we are always, always delivering value, and our stakeholders are always, always aligned. Really, really important.
That's well said. I'm not going to add very much on to that, other than saying that what we try and do at Lex and Majoto is basically deliver those outcomes around contracts, around process, around innovation, around kind of making legal teams successful in organizations, and also making lawyers actually enjoy their work more.
Very cool. All right, Denis and Manu, do you want to, give us some final remarks? And I guess before we get there, I just want to say thank you. This was a really fun, super eye-opening workshop into what contracts could look like. I think, just looking at the polls, the most recent poll looks like 60% of the audience is curious, about 20% is excited, 23% are still skeptical, and then 18%, probably that same 18%, are unlikely to use legal design, 70% are curious and may try it, and 13% are for sure adopt some legal design principles. So really eye-opening stuff, and I thought it was a really interesting and really well done presentation. So thank you so much, and I want to kick it back to you guys for some final remarks, and then we'll sign off.
Don't really have very much more to add to that, other than that we wanted to thank you again and thank everybody here for their participation. You were a great audience. We had some super interesting contributions really, really early on, and obviously this wouldn't work without that. So thanks for that. As we mentioned, we are based in the UK and Europe, and primarily focused over here, but we have got an increasing client base in the US. So if there is anything here that intrigued you and that you want to talk more about, we're both very happy to jump on a Zoom call and follow up directly. You'll find us both on LinkedIn, and feel free to link in with us. And we, as you'll see when you do link in with us, we love sharing general knowledge and insights with the audience. So it'd be great to have you as a participant within our LinkedIn community.
All right.
I would just add, thank you so much for being so engaged. I know it's really hard to do this when there's such a big group. So this has been really amazing. I love the discussion. I've tried to answer a few of these other commenting questions. I'm sorry I can't do anything more at this point, but I love that discussion. And look, we showed you a pretty radical design. It's not the most radical design. There's far more radical designs out there. We showed you a pretty radical one, but and that was intentional. That's for impact. But I think if you start even with One of the simplest design techniques you can do is put all the variables in your contracts in one place at the top of your contract. You'll find it amazing how much the business will like that contract more, and how much easier it will be to fill in, how much easier it will be to self-serve. And that's a relatively simple piece of design. And if there's any sort of for any of the skeptics, if that's one thing to take away, try and do that, and you'll see just how impactful it is. And why? Because you're putting the users first, and it's as simple as that. So applying those techniques and kind of incrementally improving and changing how you do things, and not just with contract, with services. I think that's what we all want, right? We want to be more effective for our users.
I know I said I hadn't got anything else to say, but there were two comments. There were two comments that came in that I did want to address. So Shanika said, UK, you created the problem, so good on you for solving it. So yeah, thanks for that. We'll absolutely do our best. And Scott has asked, what's the relationship between the two companies? And we haven't mentioned that. So as I mentioned, I'm the CEO or the founder of LexSolutions. Denis is the founder of Majoto. We work incredibly closely together. So we've been doing business together for the last few years. LexSolutions is a legal consultancy. So we're helping in-house teams with all aspects of their work, from overflow to legal innovation, including design, and also programs around culture and coaching. And Majoto is a legal tech tool. So it's essentially a platform to democratize legal design. And at the moment, legal design is happening, as you'll see, in lots of different contexts. But what we're creating there is a platform to help automate for that. So we're automating for simplicity, for aesthetics, for relationships, and so on. And we're both involved in each other's businesses as we are in each other's lives more generally. So the business are as interwoven as we are.
All right. Awesome. Great. Again, really eye-opening. I really enjoyed it. And I think it's really cool. Hope maybe it'll catch on, in the US. All right.
Yeah, I mean, it's caught on a lot in Europe, UK and Europe. And there's a great opportunity for you guys to really start delivering some real value and having a lot of fun. So, we'd love to play with you.
All right. All right, great stuff. Thank you so much, Denis and Manu. Thank you, everybody, for tuning in and participating. This was a wonderful workshop. We'll wrap up here. Again, if you want to get in touch with Denis and Manu, find them on LinkedIn and take it from there.